So let's go ahead and look at creating a single panel version for use on smaller devices. And to illustrate the problem, I'm going to run the program on an LG simulator, which has 320 by 240 resolution. So here's the app, and you'll notice the buttons are all squished off to the side. It's really not very good, and everything's sort of jammed over. It's a little better in landscape mode, but even in landscape, some of the buttons are a little too narrow. So what we really want for a small device is to just have one fragment on the screen at a time. And we're going to start with the list view. And when you click on one of the things in the list view, the fragment is going to get replaced with the meal fragment. And then if you hit back, we want to return to the list. So I'm going to use replace on fragments rather than have a two fragment layout. And let's see how you do that. So I'm going to exit the app. And I don't have to make too many changes here. So the first change is I want to have an easy way of telling whether I'm in one panel mode or two panel mode. And so I'm going to create a config.xml file, Android resource file, config.xml, and it's going to be under values. And I'm just going to have a single Boolean resource in here called toPanel. And for small screens, it's going to be false. And for large screens, it's going to be true. Now, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to have some qualifiers, the large qualifier on some of these resources. So if it's config large and under values dash large, then I'm going to be in two panel mode, so it'll be true. But then I'm going to make the default one, anything that isn't large, I'm going to have two panel mode be false. So this one isn't qualified, so this is going to be false. So my default is one panel mode. And then I'm going to create another resource file, also called config.xml. And then this one is going to have the size qualifier set to large. So this time, create the same Boolean resource for two panel, but this time the value is true. So two panel for large and not two panel for everything else. I also need to add a new activity main. So let's create a new layout resource file. And this is going to be activity main.xml. And I'm going to add a size qualifier on that. So this is going to be my two panel version. And since I already have a two panel layout, my original one is two panel, I'm going to copy and paste all of that into here. And then I'm going to edit the default one to just have a single frame layout in it. So one frame layout, this is going to be a singleton tag. Get rid of everything else in here. And I need to add an ID. And we'll call this fragment container. So the default layout is going to have just one fragment. The large layout will have two fragments. Now I have to change my main activity. So here's what happens when you create a new one. I'm adding two fragments, one to list fragment, one to meal fragment. But instead of doing that, I'm going to first check get resources.get boolean, and then I'm going to pass r.bool.toPanel. So if this is true, that means I'm in two panel mode. So I do the same thing as I used to do. Otherwise, I'm in one panel mode. So what I want to do is almost the same. except that instead of adding the meal list fragment and the meal fragment, I'm just going to add the meal list fragment, and I'm going to add it to fragment container. So I'm only creating one fragment, and then when the user clicks on a list item inside of the fragment, I'm going to have to do something different. So I can't just call mmeal fragment of set meal here because I don't have a meal fragment. It's only one fragment so far. So I'm going to say if get resources dot get boolean r dot bool dot to panel. If this is true, then I'm going to do what I used to do before. Else, so here's where I want to create my meal fragment. So I'm going to copy this code here. And put that in the else clause. And what I really want to do is I want to create a new meal fragment. And then I want to add that meal fragment to the fragment container. But instead of adding it, I want to replace the one that's already there. So I'm replacing the list fragment with the meal fragment. And I also want to be able to return back to the list fragment. So I'm going to add to backstack and just specify null for the optional argument. And so this will go ahead and replace the meal fragment, or replace the list fragment with the meal fragment. And then I want to call meal fragment dot set meal, pass an ID. So there's a problem here though, which is if I call set meal, it's going to try to set the text and the picture to the meal, but the text and picture don't exist yet. They won't actually be created until just before my onStart gets called. So I've just created it, but it's not going to be ready yet. So what I'm going to do is go to my meal fragment and change set meal. So I'm still going to set mCurrentMeal to item, but first I'm going to check if getView is not equal to null. This means that the view is ready. So if getView is not equal to null, it means that I'm ready to draw, and so I do the same thing as I usually do. If the view is not ready, then what's going to happen is at a later point, onStart's going to get called. And since I've set mCurrentMeal to the item, this will exist, and so I'm going to set meal of current meal. So if the meal fragment exists, it will happen right away. If the meal fragment doesn't exist, it will store the current meal and then update the view later when it's ready. So that should be everything. Let's go ahead and try it. And first I'll try it on the Optimus. So I have my one fragment layout, and it works. So my back button works, returns me to the list view. Everything looks good here. Let's go ahead and change orientation, and it still remembers the picture. Perfect. Okay. And then exit out of the program. And now let's try it in two-panel mode and see if that still works. So on a large device, everything still works the same.